Welcome to the Investor Coaching Show, a podcast to help you get an insider's view of the financial world and escape common investment traps. We look at the financial news of the day and help you make sense of it so you can relax about money. And here's your host, Paul Winkler.
And welcome to the Investor Coaching Show. Paul Winkler talking money and investing, along with Evan Barnard and Arlene Brown hanging out here with me. All right, so what do you guys have to say for yourselves? Ready? Woohoo! See, if you're watching the video, see Arlene's hair sticking straight up.
There you go.
Because she put her... That's what you know what's good about Arlene? When you're like me, you don't have any hair, it doesn't matter.
She's got her free market Mickey Mouse ears on.
There's something wrong with us. I'm really... Hey, you know what, guys, I was thinking about this week.
You were?
I sit around and I think way too much. It's probably, I had to just reform and stop doing it. Can you imagine being Elon Musk? I mean, not the
really.
Financial side of things. I can't imagine just the pressure of being.
But he thrived in that.
I don't.
He is eating all the pressure. That's like more pressure. Go.
Is he, or is it eating him? I mean, that just seems like it's really, really challenging. I mean, it's just like at every turn, somebody's after you and trying to get to you in some way or another. You know, it's like there was an interesting interview, and I thought it was just fascinating, and I thought it would just spurn a little bit of a conversation. And who knows which way this conversation will go. But, I think that from a, we talk a lot about what makes companies work and what makes economies work. Mm-hmm. And I think from if you're a person that runs a company, remember we talked a little bit earlier and we just made the point that, here's what you want to do as a person that owns a company or runs a company or whatever. And this is what makes capitalism work in general. And that's typically when we invest, we're able to actually participate in capitalism all around the world.
Yes.
Is the idea behind it. And when we look at when you invest, we talk about different markets around the world. We talk about large U.S. stocks. And sometimes what happens, that's where it stops for a lot of people. But if you look at the U.S., we would say that was an emerging economy 100 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we want to be, in my humble opinion, investing in more emerging economies around the world. Mm-hmm. Because we say, here's what we're doing is we're exporting a lot of jobs to other countries, but we typically are exporting jobs that are not necessarily higher paying jobs in many cases, because we want to live a higher standard of living. We would rather have, and this is where it gets real debatable, as what jobs are being exported. Are they more security related, or would they have something to do with some of our own economic security, like steel being produced outside the United States? You can get into those types of things. But the point that I'm making here is that what we have a tendency to do is we have, historically, and this comes from one of my friends is an economist out at Dartmouth, and he used to talk about how we export jobs that are typically more manufacturing related because the upper income jobs were more service related. And now we're bringing some of that back here for security reasons. But I think that the point being that we invest in different parts of the world because different functions are being served by different countries. And if we invest all in one country, we are going to be more focused or concentrated on certain industries if certain functions are being done elsewhere. Mm-hmm. Like maybe we actually produce things and they're assembled in a country like Mexico, like for example.
Yeah.
Is an example of how that can happen. Well, so Musk is, he's got his hands in a lot of different things, but he was being picked on for being anti-competitive in some ways. And he was being interviewed, and I want to just play a couple things that he did because it was really interesting. I did not know this about Elon Musk and some of the companies that he's operating. Check this out.
Nothing any of my companies have done has been to stifle competition. In fact, we've done the opposite. So at Tesla, we have open sourced our patents. Anyone can use our patents for free. How many companies do you know who've done that?
Yeah.
Can you name one?
Tesla.
I can't.
Well, Anne, our resident attorney, had to argue that she had. But it was Volvo, and it was for the seatbelt. Yeah, I mean, it was like a minor thing. The reality of it. It was, yeah. How did you know that?
I have no social life.
I'm surprised you knew that, Evan. I didn't. But it was seatbelt. But yeah, you look at this stuff. This is high level stuff that he's letting other people use, not the seatbelt. But I did not realize that. And he says, about anti-competitive. And you think about it, I remember remember Beta versus VHS?
Yes.
In every way, Beta was superior, right?
Right.
But VHS won the day because there was more shared information.
Yeah.
And the more you let other people, and I think that is a lesson of life. The more you bring enough other people along with you for the ride in success, the better off you'll be. And more than just financially, I mean, just in every way.
And Uncle Charlie Munger has also said that.
Has he? I knew I liked him.
About helping other people.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. But he goes on to say,
at SpaceX, we don't use patents. So, I mean, once in a while, we'll file a patent just so some patent troll doesn't cause trouble.
Which I think is funny. I think it's funny. I mean, sometimes you just have to play the game,
right?
Because otherwise, they're going to get mad at you if you. So it's just like the silliness so much of government regulations.
Yeah, they'll sue
cases.
him for an idea that they stole from him.
Yeah, exactly. That makes total sense, right, Evan?
But we're not stopping any. We've done nothing anti-competitive. We've done nothing to stop our.
I'm not suggesting you at all.
No, I just want to clarify for the audience because
he's speaking in front of a large audience right here. So the guy from CNBC is basically what Andrew is just going. Wait, no, I'm not picking on. No, I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to the audience.
Maybe, but that's a very common thing. Is people have said that you're anti-competitive, and I'm not saying you are.
That's a really good point.
I was just teasing. Yeah,
it's like Proverbs. You pick on somebody. I was just teasing.
Yes,
So that is very true quite often, and that's what they'll do. The media will do, right? I'm not saying that you're doing that. People say that, right? Yeah, no, good point. It's a way to take the heat off yourself.
Some companies have done anti-competitive things. I think the strange thing, or the unusual thing about SpaceX and Tesla is that we've done things that have helped our competition. So at Tesla, we have made our supercharger system open access. We've made our charger technology available for free to the other manufacturers.
The reason
no walled garden. We could have put a wall up. But instead, we invited them in.
Yeah, and he even gave the government, let them use information.
Well, and now it's going to become the standard, by the way.
Yeah, and you see
that's going to become the standard, just like VHS versus Beta. That technology and that port and all that is what's going to be rolled out, and all the vehicles are going to start using the same deal.
Yeah. And I think that the point about this, there's a couple of points that can be made about this. And number one, you think about it when a company, and I've often said this, when a company comes up with a technology, we want to invest in that one company. Mm-hmm. And, for sure, Tesla has done great. But, the Magnificent Seven, a lot of companies have done really well. A lot of people are saying, wow, gosh, they're super, super high price, and it's a little bit late to get in that party, which, there's a good point to be made there. But think about it, if a company shares information like that and has to, in order to be successful, they have to share information or they have to be able, in Musk's point being that I have to do this because then, as Evan said, it becomes mainstream. As an investor, and I own hundreds of thousands of companies that are all benefiting from the technology that they came up with. Wouldn't you want to be an investor in all those companies? And doesn't that scream for the desire to and the need to make sure that some real good diversification is taking place in your portfolio?
Yeah. And some of those lesser known or lesser followed companies, let's say, that would now use that technology weren't, we always hesitate to use the word underpriced or undervalued or anything, but the value is always fair. But they didn't have to spend on R&D, and so all of a sudden, if they now have this new cost taken off the table,
that's a really good point.
They could benefit higher as a stock price change than Tesla or the inventor of that technology.
No, that's a super point.
The consumers, they will benefit because the price will go down.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when your price goes down and the consumers benefit, that allows the consumers to spend on things that they might not have otherwise spent on, and that can benefit other companies in that way as well.
Or they may actually buy an electric car because they can afford it.
Well, did you guys Consumer Report? I don't know. Mel, Consumer Reports actually lampooned the EV. Did you see that, Arlene?
Yeah.
Yeah, they were tearing it apart. They were tearing it apart for reliability issues. But what they pointed out was that the hybrids were actually fairly well looked at. You're thinking on that, Arlene, because you have this kind of.
Well, that's why hybrids have actually like more than 1 year delayed distribution. I mean, the order is back up for more than a year for the hybrid cars.
Well, what do you guys think about the idea that if we, this is interesting. What is going to happen as far as tax revenue to improve roads in the future if the gas tax was actually so used?
Oh, they'll just do a wheel tax or something. I mean, they'll figure it out.
Yeah, they're gonna have to do.
They were talking about taxing bicycles yesterday. On 99.7, they're talking about taxing bikes because they're going to be on the road because they were talking about this infrastructure plan in Nashville.
Right. Yeah, I think you're probably right, some kind of a wheel tax. But, so you look at that because there have been some financial people, they're going to go and they're going to and increase income taxes as a result of it. I think it would make a whole lot more sense to actually take whatever tax and raise a tax that actually is in concert with whatever it is that is utilizing the roads. And yeah. So I think that makes a whole lot more sense. But so I think from a standpoint of all of this talk about what's happening, it is not the pure electric vehicle that is necessarily being looked at that favorably, as we've been talking about for quite a while. But it's some hybrid between the two, and where that's going to go, nobody knows. But I think it's interesting when Consumer Reports comes out and all of a sudden says this is really, the reliability has been really, really bad. And then you look at the amount of materials. They were doing something on CNBC. They were talking about the amount of materials to make these vehicles coming from outside the United States is abysmal. It's really high. So you're looking at a geopolitical risk as well. And that whole dynamic may change in a year. As a result of what, with the elections next year.
Exactly. And, we've been talking a lot about capitalism today. And I was driving, just a local example of the risk return that capitalism has to deal with, both as investors valuing that and the business taking the risk, is I was driving south of Spring Hill. I kind of went home a different route because I forget what I was doing. But anyway, I was going down on 31 and past the GM plant, and now there's this huge battery plant, just south of the GM assembly works. And you think, okay, well, if all of a sudden EVs aren't popular, now they might have to retool to do a hybrid, and what are they going to manufacture, and how many billions of dollars went into that complex? They deserve to make billions of dollars if they guess right and they produce a profit. There's a huge risk that's just sitting there, and if the winds shift, that could be a horrible decision in hindsight, or they'll modify it and they'll come up with, they'll make new batteries for, hybrids. But, that's just an example of, we see these buildings, that's capitalism.
And when you look at a lot of investment portfolios, do you primarily see U.S. stocks or international stocks?
U.S.
Okay, U.S. Okay. So when you have a government that comes in and says mandates that you've got to do this,
right,
it can be problematic.
Yeah.
And one of the things that came out in the Consumer Reports, the writings, was that some of the countries, this reminded them, I thought it was interesting, of the Consumer Reports, their own reporting back in the 1980s. Because what they said was that some of the best vehicles coming out from a reliability standpoint were actually not manufactured in the United States, which is kind of sad in a way. But the reason I bring it up is because this is important as an investor. Primarily, most people are really concentrated in the U.S. markets, which are a bit frothy, compared to historic. Not saying that they're going to come down,
right,
or when they're going to come down, but the area of most people's portfolio that is greatest representation, which is large U.S. growth stocks, is selling for a pretty stinking high price compared to history. Mm-hmm. And the areas that are selling for very, very low prices are, the international, and most people are very, very underrepresented. And yet those are the types of companies, remember in the 1970s and 1980s, that dominated the automobile markets. Mm-hmm. And they dominated so much manufacturing, and they dominated from a return standpoint in stock markets. And I think this is why it's so critical to make sure that you do not become complacent with decent returns of large U.S. companies in recent years, and recognize that, and they use the example in this particular article about Consumer Reports, I should say, of the Nifty 50 stocks and the Magnificent Seven, and how the parallels were so similar, in that in the early 1970s, it was the U.S. large manufacturers and the big companies that were on everybody's radar screen, and they were like, these guys can do no wrong. They're wonderful. They're great. It's going to be the future, and blah, blah, blah. And those very nifty 50 that the media talked about so much and talked up were the very companies that had the worst returns going forward. And what happens as investors, if you're flat-footed and you don't know what's going on in your investment portfolio, I think it's really critical to get up to speed about this, because when these changes take place, you look back in the 1970s and you look back at the early the periods of time when when that came back around, those areas that were underrepresented in so many people's portfolios, when they came back around, you couldn't get in fast enough. The prices increased too fast. And hence, you want to make sure that you're diversified before
you missed
this happens.
Right.
Yeah, before the horse gets out of the barn. I'm Paul Winkler, Evan Barnard, Arlene Brown. We'll be back right after this. Thanks for tuning in to the Investor Coaching Podcast. Now, you may be one of these people that's been listening and realizing, wow, investing, there's a lot more to it than meets the eye, and financial planning, tax laws constantly changing, and recognizing that maybe you might need some help in this area, but you don't want just anybody to help you out. So we have 10 offices in the Middle Tennessee area, and everything that we do is fee only. We align our interests with your interests. So you can get an initial 15-minute phone call with any one of our offices just by going to paulwinkler.com/call. That's it. Every one of the offices is run by somebody with 20 plus years experience. They're all degreed planners. They all have academic backgrounds in investing, and you can get the help that you need. So if you want to set up a complimentary phone consultation, just go to paulwinkler.com/call. And we look forward to seeing you soon.
Yeah, I ran across an interesting article by John Reckenthaler out of Morningstar, and the title is Mutual Fund Strategies Don't Belong on Trial. And there's a specific reason for that title, as you'll see. Here's the complaint. This summer, 4 former employees of a company called Cobham Advanced Electronic Solutions filed a class action lawsuit. Their claim: the organization breached its fiduciary duties by selecting unsuitable funds for its 401k plan.
Whoa. Okay. All right.
Have your attention?
Yes, you do.
Receiving the most attention in their suit, and the topic of today's discussion, was the Target Date Series American Century One Choice Portfolio.
Target date funds?
Yeah. So it's really interesting because and there's a lot of research that went into the article. It was really very well done. The plaintiffs start by questioning the series costs. And, like we've seen before, if you look at all of the various target date funds out there, Fidelity, Vanguard, America, whatever.
Right.
They all, they're all poorly designed in our view, heavy, large U.S. growth companies and so forth.
Yeah,
but,
big
minor
companies,
tweaks
growth, sure.
around each other. Mm-hmm. Well, they start by talking about the costs. That case does not appear strong. The current expense ratio of this fund, ARDUX, the fund specifically cited by the plaintiffs, is 0.49%.
Yeah, not like
that's
not unreasonable.
Well below the average fund expense and so forth.
Because the area of the market that they're managing is a really low cost area of the market to manage. So you wouldn't expect a real high management fee for that.
You wouldn't, and it's a portfolio anyway, a fund of funds, but still, it's a very reasonable expense for what that is. And he said, John said, I don't think they're going to win on the cost merit. Here's the interesting thing, though, is they basically said because of this, because of how the fund was designed, it underperformed. And what went on to happen, they looked at the top 25 target date funds. And in fact, this fund was 3 from the bottom. Okay, it was number 22 out of the list that they looked at from common target date funds in 401k plans. But if you looked inside of the fund, it was a more conservatively structured portfolio, but there was really nothing, from a fiduciary sense in the 401k world, out of kilter. They just had a lower stock allocation, and they had more on the fixed income side than a lot of their competitors. And so because of that, their performance was lower during a period of high stock performance. Well, if they had done this survey in 2008, this probably would have been at the top of the chart.
It would have been great, and they would be like, we love you guys.
Because the stock-heavy target date funds, and so you could argue, well, they were being more conservative because they were a fiduciary. They weren't taking risk and so forth. And that's kind of the point of the article was, okay, it didn't perform well, but does that mean they should be sued because their strategy didn't work? His ultimate summary is let the free market do its job, let investors, let 401k committees abandon the fund and put their money somewhere else with a strategy that more aligns with their risk tolerance or whatever. But it doesn't belong in court just because the strategy didn't work out. I thought it was really an interesting piece that they went through.
Well, I like it. I like the way he said as well that risk was not even considered.
Right. If you looked at the Sharpe ratio, which I had to review this morning, frankly, looking at their return divided by their standard deviation.
Market return minus the risk-free rate divided by standard deviation is what that is. Yeah.
They were the top-rated target date fund based on their risk-adjusted
interesting.
return.
Interesting.
And so, I'm not an attorney, but I'm going to say these people aren't going to win on the merits of the case. But the interesting thing was that they had taken a legal challenge as opposed to just abandoning the fund and saying, okay, we're going to change the strategy or whatever. And, we've seen some of these lawsuits in 401ks previously where either they don't have choice or, the funds really are egregious in the selection menu. But in this case, you don't usually hear target date funds get roped into litigation. It was an interesting issue.
Well, a couple of comments on that. So, as I hear you talking about what happened with that, I'm thinking in terms of the fund doing something that I've often said that most target funds won't do, which is look different than their peers because there's a danger in that.
Right.
If you're driving down I-65 and you're the one person
going 86 instead of the others going 83.
Now, if you're there, if everybody's going 80, you're probably not going to get pulled over. Your likelihood's not going to be pulled over. So if you look like everybody else, even if you're breaking the law,
right,
you're still fairly safe. But in this particular case, they did something. They took a risk. Maybe, I don't know what was going on in their minds, whether they took that risk thinking that the stock market was going to go down and they were going to look brilliant, doing that. The reality of it is your odds are against you of being right if you're betting against the stock market historically. But that could have been a reason that they had done it. So number one, I think in terms of that, they were more conservative. When you talk about target date funds, I was thinking the possibility would be that people, as time goes on, and I've often said this to people, I said, here's the deal. You have 404C and 401k for a reason, which is basically this. Give the investors enough different choices that if down the road they've been listening to Paul Winkler, Evan Barnard, and Arlene Brown, and they've been hearing us say that these portfolios aren't terribly well diversified, there's a problem, and they have underperformed what they should have had in their 401ks, and now they're living at a much lower standard of living than they should have been, then they can't come back and sue you as the employer because you gave them other choices.
Right.
You didn't just put target date funds in the portfolio. You did put a small cap fund in there. You did put some smattering of value funds in there. And you put enough other things. And that's why that rule actually exists, 404C, is to allow companies to have these target date funds and some other things and not worry about, well, if everybody just goes to the default and target date fund, they can't blame us because we did give them other choices. Hey, this is Paul Winkler. Hope you enjoyed today's edition of the Investor Coaching Show. You want to learn more about what we do, go to our website, paulwinkler.com. You can watch some of the videos there, and if you're not already a client, you can set up a free initial consultation. Until next time, I'm Paul Winkler, reminding you that I believe that more educated investors are more confident investors, and confident investors are more successful investors. Have a great one. Advisory services offered through Paul Winkler, Inc., an SEC-registered investment advisor. The opinions voiced and information provided in this material are for general informational purposes only and not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine what investments are appropriate for you, please consult with a financial advisor. Paul Winkler, Inc. does not provide tax or legal advice. Please consult your tax or legal advisor regarding your particular situation.